Well, in this edition, it will be page 26 bottom. And it will continue. And now, do you have a copy of the other edition?
No.
Try to synchronize it while I give my general introduction. Okay? Try to synchronize the edition with it. Shouldn't be too difficult. Do you mean
the second process?
In second process, yeah. But good. Now, I remind you only of the general points we made. On the basis of the consideration of June and Soren. The first point which Kant tries to establish is the supremacy of practical reason, of morality, which means to dethrone speculative reason. There is no possibility of knowledge of supra-sensible things. And on the other hand, that is we trace primarily to Hume, what Kant regarded as indispensable to revise radically the traditional concept of reason. Knowledge of sensible things, that is Kant's answer, is based on a projection of the possible object of sensible experience. These are the two points which appear at the first acquaintance with Kant. No knowledge of supra-sensible things, no metaphysics in traditional sense is possible. But knowledge of sensible things does not have the character which is generally assumed. Knowledge of sensible things is based on the projection by reason of possible objects of experience. Now we must see how these two assertions make possible the assertion of the supremacy of practical of morality. Now let us continue at the point in the preface to the second edition where we left off last time. In the normal Kant translation, page 26 bottom. Has someone been so good as to find out what the equivalent in the other edition is? Because I cannot do everything, you see, and need some help if you don't want to waste too much time. This is the 14th paragraph from the beginning. That someone could have been so good to find it out in the meantime. Excuse me if I'm a bit impatient. Whoever has it begins to read. Kant has spoken of the fact that his work, being a critique of theory, might be thought to be of a merely negative kind. And then he goes on to say, to show that it has some positive usefulness. To deny to this service of the critique a positive usefulness, wherever it goes, it should go on there.
But it will be asked, what sort of treasure is this that we propose to decree to posterity? What is the value of the metaphysics that is alleged to be thus purified by criticism and established once for all? On a cursory view of the present work, it may seem that its results are merely negative, warning us that we must never venture with speculative reason beyond the limits of experience. Such is in fact its primary use. But such teaching at once acquires positive value when we recognize that the principles with which speculative reason ventures out beyond its proper limits do not in fact extend the employment of reason, but, we find on closer scrutiny, inevitably narrow it. These principles properly belong not to reason but to sensibility, and when thus employed, they threaten to make the bounds of sensibility coextensive with the real, and so to supplant reason in its pure, practical employment. So far, therefore, as our critique limits speculative reason, it is indeed negative, but since it thereby removes an obstacle which stands in the way of the employment of practical reason, nay, threatens to destroy it, it has in reality a positive and very important use. At least this is so, immediately we are convinced that there is an absolutely necessary practical deployment of pure reason, the moral, in which it inevitably goes beyond the limits of sensibility. Though practical reason, in thus proceeding, requires no assistance from speculative reason, it must yet be assured against opposition that reason may not be brought into conflict with itself. To deny that the service which the critic renders is positive in character would thus be like saying that the police are of no positive benefit, inasmuch as their main business is merely to prevent the violence of which citizens stand in mutual fear, in order that each may pursue his vocation in peace and security. That space and time are only forms of sensible intuition, so only conditions of the existence of things as appearances. That, moreover, we have no concepts of understanding, and consequently no elements for the knowledge of things, save insofar as intuition can be given corresponding to these concepts, and that we can therefore have no knowledge of any object as a thing in itself, but only insofar as it is an object of sensible intuition, that is, an appearance. All this is proved in the analytical part of the critique. Thus it does indeed follow that all possible speculative knowledge of reason is limited to mere objective experience.
Let's stop here a moment. Is the thought of Kant clear in a general way? And then we can perhaps go to special difficulties or intricacies to which he has referred. All possible theoretical or speculative knowledge is limited to mere objects of experience. That is the result of the critique. We do not have to go into the question how it is arrived at. But its result must be understood as such, otherwise we cannot go forward. Is this point clear? All possible speculative knowledge is limited to mere objects of experience. The terms are Kant, mere objects of experience, which means to mere objects of sensible experience. There is no possible speculative knowledge of non-sense effects. Now let us continue to get the other part of Kant's thesis. At the point where we left off.
But our further contention must also be duly borne in mind. Namely, that though we cannot know these objects as things in themselves, we must yet be in position at least to think them as things in themselves. Otherwise, we should be landed in the absurd conclusion that there can be no appearance without anything that appears.
But there could be appearance without that which appears, yeah? Now let us stop here and read the note which they explains, that understands what he means by that.
To know an object, I must be able to prove its possibility, either from its actuality as attested by experience, or a priori by means of reason. But I can think whatever I please, provided only that I do not contradict myself, that is, provided my concept is a possible thought. This suffices for the possibility of the concept, even though I may not be able to answer for their being in the sum of all possibilities an object corresponding to it. But something more is required before I can ascribe such a concept objective validity, that is, real possibility. The former possibility is merely logical. This something more need not, however, be sought in the theoretical sources of knowledge. It may lie in those that are practical.
Yeah, that is what we talk here for a moment. So, in fact, the question arises, we know only we know things. Trees. Kant says the critique of pure reason proves that these are only appearances of phenomena. Kant contends that this implies that there are things in themselves which, for the same reason, are inaccessible. That is, we must take this to begin with as a merely dogmatic assertion. There is a very great difficulty here, which was noted by one of the earliest critics of Kant, that without the thing in itself, as we put it, one cannot enter into Kant's thought, and with it, one cannot stay within it. But whether Kant does not, whether there is not a necessity for Kant to assert that, we must see later. But that is crucial. The contention that we know the general knowledge of the phenomenal world implies for Kant necessarily that the things in themselves are inaccessible to us. But he goes on to say and says, we can think things in themselves, while we cannot know them. Now, what does this distinction between thinking and knowing mean? I can think everything Kant says, which is not self-contradictory. So, perhaps a golden mountain is not self-contradictory, or a chimera. Then it would be possible, but Kant adds logically possible, meaning it does not involve contradiction. But a logical possibility is not yet a real possibility, as Kant puts it. It does not prove that the thing in question is truly possible. For example, in the case of the chimera, assuming that it is not contradictory, to think of the street of the beast, which is a dragon in front, a goat in between, and a dragon at the end. That does not yet, assuming that it's not self-contradictory, we still don't know whether it is possible in the nature of things. We would have to know much more than we do about goats as well as about dragons to answer this question. Now, what about subtrasensitive beings? God, soul. We can think them. In that sense, they are logically possible. The concept of God, of the incorporeal, immaterial soul, is not contradictory concept. But what about the objective, the real possibility? That is not guaranteed by the logical possibility. There we need some data for that. And to which Kant says, these data do not have to be supplied by theoretical knowledge. They may be supplied by moral knowledge, by the conscience, we can say. The fact of the conscience, or given by the conscience, may show us that these notions of the existence of God and of the immortality of the soul are not merely logically possible, but in practical, for the sake of morality, necessary. Now, I do not, I'm now concerned only with helping you and myself towards a very provisional understanding of Kant's intention. There are many very difficult questions, of course, implied in almost every step. Now, if there is a particularly obnoxious stumbling block to any of you in these points which I have mentioned now, don't hesitate to bring these questions up. And if they can be, some difficulties can be disposed of by a brief discussion, that would be already good. Please.
I want to challenge, is it possible to know about things in themselves even whether they're logical or not?
That Kant means by logic what you make a certain, for example, whether incorporeal being is not a contradiction itself, that you would mean. Kant obviously implies that the notion of an incorporeal being is not contradictory in itself, but he implies.
So wonder is Kant about something that radically transcends all possibilities of unknown. No other any conception before
yeah, no, but Kant simply would say, tell me what you understand. Let us not speak about any other irrelevancy. Say the soul. The soul as an incorporeal being. Kant contends. This does not contain any contradiction. Whether you would have to show possibly how could it be so contradiction? But perhaps Kant would in a way Kant does argue in certain parts of the philosophy. The denial of it is based on an absolutization of, quote, matter. That is therefore entered into an analysis of matter, which Kant does in the and he would show that matter necessarily disintegrates if we begin to analyze it that. In other words, the assertion that incorporeal being is self-contradictory is based on a dogmatic and unanalyzed concept of matter or body. But surely the very difficulties arise here as well as regards the notion of God as being possessing all perfection. Sure. Kant was aware of these difficulties, but he said, he contends there is no possibility of contradiction, of a logic contradiction. Yes.
Why can't you think a contradictory thought? I mean, it would seem one can at least entertain a contradictory thought.
Yeah, but sure we do that unfortunately all the time. Yeah. But what does it mean? That means we, with one hand, we give something, and with the other, we take it away. So what remains is zero. To think something that is from the both Kant and Aristotle's point of view, extremely similar, self-contradiction. To contradict oneself means to say nothing. You wipe out by the second act what you have posited by the first. That is, there is no, for Kant there was no problem. Contradictory thought is an absurd thought. The strictest thing to think of. What you do think in it, for example, to say the cat is green and the cat is not green. Yeah? That contains some reality, surely. It means that there are such things as cats and there are such things as colors. Surely, these are non-contradictory thoughts. But the combination of the ascription of one color and of the denial of that ascription to that same being makes you to say nothing. Although you make use of something. Yes?
Can non-empirical concepts be more than purely negative? That is, I think Kant at some points speaks of the concept of a mere X with no content in it whatsoever. Wouldn't all content belong to empirical concepts?
Yes, no, there are these ideas of reason, of which Kant speaks in the dialectics. As follows, we must, all empirical knowledge, in the sense of scientific knowledge, is a knowledge of cause and effect, that means very truly, of conditions of conditioned things. Conditions of conditioned things. And then of course of the conditions of these conditions. In infinite request. But we cannot understand that sort of condition, according to Kant, without being aware of unconditioned. We cannot be aware of relativity except in opposing it to absolute. In a way, these acts of which Kant speaks as absolute are the same. But it has a certain definiteness by being decidedly non-conditioned, non-relative. And for Kant there is a necessity for man to think God. That is a necessity, to think God, meaning one God, the unconditioned cause of everything else, is, from Kant's point of view, necessary for human beings. But to think God and to know that He is are two entirely different things. This mere thought that the thought of God means to think not more than to think that God is possible. And it remains a mere logical possibility, and therefore empty, unless the conscience, that was the conscience, the data of the conscience, compels us to assume that God is. No analysis of phenomena, Kant says, can ever compel us to assume that God is. There is no possibility of demonstrating the existence of God. But there is a practical necessity to assume the existence of God or to believe in the existence of God. So in other words, the concepts of reason, or Kant calls concepts of reason or ideas, are not so completely empty, and especially they are not arbitrary. A unity of the whole. That, if you said it in this way, we cannot help thinking and demanding a unity of the whole. And this unity is not completely there. But on the other hand, this unity can never be found in experience. And it can never be known to be. But we must think it. Now, the concrete form of this unity is the idea of God. And to know that God exists is important. To think God is necessary. You can say it this way. In other words, it's the same would apply to the soul as well. Immortality of the soul as well. We must think that, but we cannot know. That is implied in everything. The development of this part is given in Kant's theory, doctrine of the ideas, in the first part of the dialectic.
Well, granting that we must think these concepts, such adjectives as unconditioned, unextended, non-temporal, purely negative. That is, do we get to the idea of a super-sensible thing, except by taking the empirical concept and one by one stripping it of its empirical attributes until we're left with something that is not empirical but purely negative?
Yeah, but the question is whether that is a merely arbitrary thing, this stripping. Whether the evident necessities of our reasoning do not compel us to do so. And indeed they lead in a way to empty abstractions, you can put it this way. Meaning we cannot know whether these beings are. We can never know them. But the question is whether we are not compelled by moral or practical reason to assume. Now, Mr. Sachs?
It's never been clear to me what it means in his reference to things from the
that question will be answered in the immediate sequence to some extent. Yeah?
There's one more question. Furthermore, even if we know of God only that He must exist and that He is right in the heart, we do not know any specific attribute.
We must
Can we
assume.
say God is just?
We must assume. That is Kant. That we must assume that God is holy and so on. That is developed by Kant in the critique of right doctrine. In other words, the God whom we must assume on the basis of the conscience must be a moral God. Yeah? That follows.
Is the theoretical possibility established by the theory?
But the mere
that justice is not contradictory to one of the attributes we do not know.
that means simply that God is mysterious. God is mysterious. That Kant cannot claim to have perfect knowledge of the essence of God. It's absolutely impossible from this point of view. That the God whom you must think, and to the extent to which you must think, is not self-contradictory.
Because the conscience forces us to think of a just God, we must assume that a just God is not like
Because
the
your medical knowledge doesn't tell you anything.
neither that it's possible nor that it's possible.
No, I mean, there would be a contradiction, but Kant says exactly this. If there were a theoretical knowledge of God, then there could be a contradiction between the practical conception of God and the theoretical conception. But since there is no theoretical conception of God, there can be no contradiction.
But as long as we know we are ignorant of this attribute, it is impossible for the conscience to force us to think an attribute which might be in contradiction with one of the attributes.
Sure, but
No, we are ignorant.
but all right, let's leave it at that for the time being, that there is a great difficulty. Good. And now let us read the beginning of the sequence, where we get some answer to Mr. Sachs' question. Kant has said before, we must, the distinction between thing in itself and phenomena is absolutely necessary. To speak of appearances means to imply something which appears. You can say that in itself is merely verbal. Why does he call it appearance in the first place? But we will see later on that Kant does not make use of such silly queries. Now let us first get somewhat greater clarity as to the status of these things in itself from the next sentence. Now let us assume,
Now let us suppose that the distinction which our critique has shown to be necessary between things as objects of experience and those same things as things in themselves.
Now let us stop here. So they are the same things. It is not so that we have here cats and dogs and trees and chairs, and then there is something entirely different things behind it. The same things are seen, are known to us only as objects of experience. They are not known to us as they are as things in themselves. Now that is hard to understand. One can say, explain Kant's distinction, first of all, in a merely historical way, by referring to tradition. Let us assume that all things have been created by God. God would know them in an entirely different way than we know them. The way in which God knows them is how they are as things in themselves. We know them only as created beings can know created beings. That is certainly a crucial premise of Kant's thought, the possibility of creation and the divine knowledge of its created things. But one can perhaps understand Kant's thought also from a way which is more familiar to us today. What is the way in which average people of some so-called scientific or sophistication conceive of this matter? And what is the status of our knowledge, say our scientific knowledge, according to what is assumed today? Vulgarly, vaguely, because we cannot help thinking about the same problems, although not necessarily on the basis of the same premises as Kant does. Our understanding is human understanding. I mean, on all levels, from sense up to infinite. All our knowledge is relative to man. And some people today see even it is relative to specific man, say modern man, Chinese, and so we don't have to go into that complication. All knowledge is relative to man. Yeah, but why should this knowledge or perception relative to man have a higher status than the perception relative to dog, cat, elephant, etc.? Does this not create a problem if all knowledge is relative to man? Does it not necessarily raise open the question of a kind of knowledge which would not imply a derogatory relativity? You see, I will develop this a bit better. According to the view which prevails today within the sciences, as far as I know, man is a purely accidental thing. There could be entirely different beings who also might be able to use verbal symbols, but would not be men. As could be shown by the fact that they would not be able to breathe as human beings. Anything possible. Maybe the Martians are creatures of this kind. Now, what is that? What does knowledge mean under such conditions? Of course, you can say knowledge is nothing but a tool which this particular being called man produces in order to survive. Something of this kind is sometimes suggested. But there is something unsatisfactory in that. Because somehow we also think of knowledge as objective and not suffering from this kind of relativity. I do not know whether I make myself clear now. Let us look back at the Platonic Aristotelian to see other possibilities. For Aristotle especially, but it is also true of Plato and Metaphysics. This problem doesn't arise because man is not accidental. Man is that being, the only being known to us, which is open to everything. Man is the old formula was man is a microcosm, and therefore man has in himself the possibility of openness to the macrocosm, to all strata and aspects of the whole. So that there is no relativity to man, because relativity to man means the relativity to the measure Plato does not reject, as some ignorant people say, the position that man is a measure of everything. He rejects a certain silly version of that the individual is a measure of all things. But man as man is the measure of all things. If you look up the presidential laws, in the studies, you see that cautious formulation is used there, simply rejection. Now, that is abandoned. Man is just one species among any other species. What is the status of knowledge? That then there is a question of the status of knowledge. Now, if there is, Kant draws this conclusion. Man is not the microcosm, that is somehow in time. Therefore, a relativity of knowledge to man implies another kind of knowledge, which is truly open, and that can, according to Kant, can only be divine knowledge, not a door. Therefore, in other words, it seems that the Kantian assertion of the thing in itself is one and a very respectable alternative to the classical view that the microcosm, macrocosm view. That is, I think, the way to look at it. Today, this question is, of course, pushed back by virtue of a certain attempt to get rid of anything which could be called false metaphysics, but an attempt which has never been successful except in bringing us into ever emptier formalism, and therefore not altogether to be recommended. There is another criticism possible of Kant, which was made up by Friedrich Hegel, for which I shall speak later. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty reconciling what you just said with things we hear about Aristotle, for instance, that the human things are not the highest things.
No.
No, the human things, right?
But that does not there is a passage in the 6th book of the Ethics where he makes a distinction, between white and, say, useful. And there Aristotle says that something is white is simply something. But if you say useful, you imply a relativity. Useful for human beings, for fishes, for trees, or what have you. The human things, what also means by human things are things which are relative to man, insofar as he is not a thinking being. For the time being, that is the most difficult of all questions in the issue, right? But that I cannot go beyond that now. We may come to other aspects of it later. Now, I suggest that we continue now so that we come. You must not forget that our discussion is quite natural and necessarily very vague up to this point. We must come to that concrete and serious question, which is the starting point of this whole distinction. And Kant will speak of that in the immediate sequel. So let us first read our passage. Yes? We read the same sentence again.
Now let us suppose that a distinction which our critique has shown to be necessary between things as objects of experience and those same things themselves had not been made. In that case, all things in general, as far as they are sufficient causes, should be determined by the principle of causality and consequently by the mechanism of nature.
This is clear, first of all. if there is no distinction made between things as phenomena and things as things in themselves, then we must say that principle of causality in its strictest deterministic sense is unqualifiedly valid. Unqualifiedly valid. Yes?
I could not, therefore, without possible contradiction, say of one and the same thing, for instance, the human soul, that its will is free, yet it's subject to natural necessity, that is not free. For I have taken the soul in both propositions in one and the same sense, namely as a thing in general, that is, as a thing in itself, and saved by means of the preceding critique, could not have done otherwise.
Do you see that? Now let's go so that you see that. It is necessary, Kant says, to say of one being, human soul, that it is free. Because if it were not free, morality would be impossible. On the other hand, it is also necessary to say the soul is not free, but every human thought or will is fully determined. It is necessary to say, because why is the latter necessary to say? Because such things as conservation of energy could not be maintained if within the whole system of physical phenomena, if this were not fully determined, the scientific understanding of the word Kant contains requires strict necessity of every action, including, of course, mental acts, occurring in one and the same world. And we would get all kinds of superstitions would come in if that were not strictly maintained. On the other hand, it is impossible to deny the freedom of the will without denying morality. That is the problem for which Kant really starts. The necessity to maintain the universal mechanism of all events, and at the same time to assert the freedom of the will. That is the starting point. And Kant says there is no way out. Either you must question causality, and to question it at any point, means of course to destroy the principle. And on the other hand, morality. Now let us read for a reason.
But if our critique is not in error in teaching that the object is to be taken in a twofold sense, namely as appearance and as thing in itself, if the deduction of the concepts of understanding is valid, and the principle of causality therefore applies only to things taken in the former sense, namely insofar as they are objects of experience, these same objects, in the other sense, not being subject to the principle, then there is no contradiction in supposing that one and the same will is in the appearance, that is, in its visible act, necessarily subject to the law of nature, and so far not free, while yet as belonging to a thing in itself, it is not subject to that law, and is therefore free. My soul, viewed from the latter standpoint, cannot indeed be known by means of speculative reason, and still less through empirical observation, and freedom as a property of a being to which I attribute effects in the sensible world is therefore also not knowable in any such fashion.
You see, in other words, I cannot say I know the soul as a being of a certain nature, and therefore I know that the soul is free agent. It's impossible. Therefore, the only way of knowing freedom of man is to know it from a datum, from a fact accessible to us, and that is a moral law, which implies that we are free. The moral law is telling to us how shall act in certain way. Says, implies that we are free to act or not to act. Yeah? That's the most superficial meaning of freedom. And therefore, the fact of the moral law is impossible without freedom. Freedom cannot be deduced from a theoretical knowledge of a spiritual substance called the soul. Yes?
So I should then have to know such a being as determined in its existence, and yet is not determined in time, which is impossible, since I cannot support my concept by any intuition. But though I cannot know, I can yet think freedom. That is to say, the representation of it is at least not self-contradictory, provided due account be taken of our critical distinction between the two modes of representation, the sensible and the intellectual, and of the resulting limitation of the pure concepts of understanding and of the principles which flow from that.
Yeah. Now, let me see, we must try to reach a point where we can translate for the purpose of our understanding what Kant says into notions which are familiar to you from your training. What would be material? Now let us assume that how does the problem stand today? Things have changed because the principle of causality is no longer the same as it was in science. But there is an equivalent. I wonder whether this will work. I just try. According to the present day, to the theory prevalent today, scientific knowledge is possible only of facts and correlations of facts. That you hear in general. It is impossible to know value. Let's say you can know value as facts, meaning that A value alpha, that you can know. But of course, you do not know it as a value, which is shown by the mere fact that conflicts between values cannot be rational scientifically decided. So we have a closed system of facts and correlation of facts. And there is no possibility of knowing values. And now, what shall we do? If we assume that this is not the last word about values, if we assume that there is some awareness of values, I apologize for the term, values, but if there is some awareness of values, but which cannot possibly have a place within scientific inquiry, must we not do something about that? Must we not limit the sphere of science and say, all right, in science we cannot talk about values in a way adequate to values. And there must be something else. That is only the first step. The second step is that if you say, if you cannot say, all right, here we have the sphere of facts, and here there is the sphere of values. That's what we do. Because the same phenomena, not as the Kantian sense, the same phenomena, the same things are both facts and both values. But a simple case, a crook, he would not appear as a crook in scientific language because of value judgment. But on the other hand, he means the same thing. When we look at him outside of the classroom, we say a crook. When we say, speak about him in the classroom, we say a mental complexity. I don't know what now, you see, what is that? How can we solve that problem? Except if we say we look at the same phenomenon from two different points of view. This would require, in the first place, given the authority of science, that we show the essential limitations of science. The state of the problem was substantively very different in Kant's time, but there is a certain similarity. Kant takes Newtonian science, understood in a strictly deterministic and atheistic sense, which he did not yet have understood. He takes this as the inescapable phenomenon. That is, you cannot theoretically understand any phenomenon except in terms, say, in materialistic, deterministic terms. It's the only way to understand. And yet, that there is something which is left out there of the utmost importance. And not only as something in heaven, in entirely different dimensions, there would be no possible conflict, but concerning the very same phenomenon, especially man. Man has to be looked upon. You look at a statistic of crime, scientific investigation, and say that the incidence of this kind of that, just as you speak of the incidence of rain or hail or whatever it is. And yet you know that is not the only way to look at crime. When you look at are confronted with a criminal proposition made to you by someone else or maybe by yourself, then you cannot look at it in statistical terms. You can of course say that I just do contribute my mind to the statistics for next year, but that is somehow not the proper way of looking at a criminal proposal. So how can we account for the duality of point of view? Except by saying the same phenomenon belongs to two radically different contexts. Number one. Number two, Kant assumes that the moral judgment is of a much higher dignity than the statistical judgment. Because you can probably understand that, although it is some you doubt it, but you can understand how someone would make this contention that if you are confronted with simple examples, it is a more relevant question when you are confronted with a criminal proposition to raise the question, ought I to do it? Then the question, what will become of next year's statistics? Because you can somehow say that we take care of the cost or harm. And so that is a higher point of view, the moral point. Therefore, the extreme expression of that is the distinction between viewing things as they appear, as they are mere phenomena, and as they are in themselves. The term thing in itself is of course a very crude expression which we usually don't call man thing. Yeah? But Kant used the term probably for a reason of caution. To use he took the most general, the most vague term, thing, and did not call it beings in themselves or something of the sort. So there is another one, so that is our even in our time, the question of the limitation of science, but it is merely in another one which I introduced to help some of you perhaps to understand what I'm talking about. It is not by no means sufficient for the simple reason that for Kant scientific knowledge is not fundamentally different from pre-scientific knowledge, as we somehow must assume today. Kant antedates non-Euclidean geometry and quite a few other things. I cannot show you that now. But we must reach a point that is absolutely necessary, where everyone can get a glimpse of Kant is doing is not meaningless as many people would say that it is. And I'm very anxious to achieve that understanding. Yes.
Perhaps one of the difficulties of Kant is that he accepts in the last analysis the moral data as higher than physical data. And taking moral data so seriously as not to push it back farther to the instruments of science, he violates the methods of science. In other words, why do we have to accept moral conscience as an unanalyzable data? Why can't we subject that?
So Kant doesn't say it's unanalyzable. Unanalyzable, he says it is irreducible. That's not quite the same.
The same thing.
All right, irreducible. All right, we reduce. All right, let us do that. Then we arrive at psychoanalysis or anything of this kind. Yeah. Good, but the question is whether that works. Whether that is really possible. Kant's analysis of morality may be questioned. But the question arises whether its premise that the moral phenomena are irreducible is questioned. Do you see that?
Yes.
Because one could conceivably analyze morality in different terms. But the question is, can you reduce morality to non-morality, to sub-morality? That's the question. The scientific people would, of course, say, you have to do it. Just as I said in Kant's time. You have to give a deterministic account of morality, which means in effect, that is at least what Kant has in mind, that it means a reduction of morality to non-morality.
Insofar as Kant wouldn't ascribe this duality to the limits of human knowledge, but rather accepted it as the prerequisites of human knowledge. If we could see that the duality of the noumenal and the phenomenal world is not inherent in the world as such, but rather due to the inability of man to go beyond appearances, we would be saying that this duality is only transitional or temporary.
Yeah, but that would, of course, that means in principle it's already done. Now, we do not have now a reduction of morality to non-morality, but we will have it in 50 or 200 years. That is, as far as the principle goes, the same thing. That wouldn't help. Now, but let me see where the problem is. Let us assume, let us take these fellows, the scientific fellows, and see whether that works and can work. They say values are merely, well, they kind of got things big of values, but they say that the distinction in good and bad, just and unjust, that is what they mean by values, pleasant and unpleasant, is merely emotive. That depends on the individual and on the constitution of the individual, what have you. That has no dignity, no cognitive dignity, whatever. Yeah? You know. Good. All right, and then we give a merely factual account that personality type A is inclined to value alpha, and social Skid Row people are inclined to type beta, and you know this kind of thing. And you can do. All right, can we leave it at that? Is it possible? The question arises regarding science itself. Is science good? This answer, of course, cannot be answered by science. This is clear. If there are no value judgments, that is like the case of science, especially. Okay? I mean, what the scientists do in selling their science in order to get foundation money is an entirely different story, but that they do as practical men or as scientists, as administrators, not as scientists. But science's assertion that science is good, that enlightenment, clarity, whatever you call it, are good things, cannot be maintained by the scientist as scientist in this modern view. So, all right. That means not only special theories or hypotheses of science, but science as a whole. The whole scientific approach is optional. Yeah? There is no, it is not so that I, as a human rational being, am obliged to respect science, and not necessarily to become a scientist, but to respect science as a great actualization of form of in which reason is actualized, so that I must despise myself if I am obscurantist. No. The values of the obscurantist are from the point of view of science as high as those of science. That's different personality types. That's all, and you cannot say one is higher than the other. Science is radically optional. What then is the fundamental fact given to state of affairs? Not science, nor any scientifically established fact or theory or hypothesis, but the fundamental option. The fundamental option, say, for simplicity's sake, science and non-science. Non-science can be divided into n possibilities that of no interest to me now. Yeah? All right. This option is really that is the fundamental form. I would like to understand that option, because while I may not be a scientific man, I try to have some clarity. Okay? How do I proceed about it? If I try to understand this fundamental option, if I try to interpret that scientifically, I contradict myself, because I make already an assumption of which I know that's optional. I have to go deeper than science. Furthermore, I know, on the basis of this same science, that the option cannot possibly be a rational choice, because no choice of any value can be rational. Action. Yeah? So, all right, we are confronted with this fact that the fundamental human phenomenon is an option of a non-rational character, which cannot be properly analyzed in scientific terms. Now let me call this option freedom. Freedom is freedom, because there is no compulsion either by external circumstances or else by reason, a radically free act. So we find then deeper than science, more fundamental than science, a fundamental freedom, which can find one possible fulfillment in science, other possible fulfillment in other pursuits. That is, if you please, an adaptation of what Kant means to the present situation. Yeah? Freedom is the most fundamental fact, that an understanding of what science does, an analysis of science, and epistemology, whatever you call it, leads to something more fundamental than science. And that to which it leads is a radical, abysmal freedom. This is what people sometimes mean today by existentialism. Existentialism is a modified form of Kant, but it has this in common, that beyond the sphere of theoretical speculative knowledge, and more fundamental more true sense is freedom. This freedom does no longer have a law as it has in Kant. It's no longer rational, that's another matter. But the formal structure of the thought is the same, and of course existentialism emerged out of a modification of Kant. So that what Kant meant is immediately intelligible to us on the basis of the present state of affairs. But indeed, in Kant, the specific formulation of the problem is entirely different, because at Kant's time, no one had said science must be Bible-free. David Hume, to whom they always refer as their father or grandfather, of course, has perfectly rightly denied that values can be rationally known, but it was clear to him that the same values are accepted by all men. But people don't act on them, Hume still could use the term natural law in the sense of moral law, although in a somewhat complicated version. Hume was not a relativist. He was not a rationalist, but he was this problem was in Kant entirely different, and in Kant the problem was limited to this question. A closed deterministic system excluding moral freedom is incompatible with the phenomenon of morality. And the question which you raise is perfectly legitimate. Is Kant's analysis of the moral phenomenon correct? Surely a very necessary question. But still, that one cannot do away, that one cannot dispose of it as a kind of old phobia or something. That I try to make sense. Now, is there any other? To repeat, Kant makes very specific assumptions. The theoretical knowledge in its perfection, as he sees it, is not the science of our day, but the science of the 18th century, late 18th century, as somewhat modified Newtonian physics with its complements. That is perfectly true. Therefore, quite a few problems arise now, which is not arise for Kant. One can state that the problem in this respect as follows. Disregarding the niceties about non-Euclidean geometry and the deterministic principle and so on, one can state it as follows. For Kant, there was no question whatever that scientific understanding, Newtonian understanding, and so that the highest understanding needs to find it of certain equations, so is simply the most perfect, the perfect form of our natural understanding. When I see X shooting Y, X the cause of the death of Y, I do not proceed in a fundamentally different way from that what the scientist does if he tries to find the cause of some other phenomenon. It is only more perfect because the scientist is not limited to this particular case, but he tries to establish laws of cause and effect. In the course of the 19th century, especially in the last decades of the 19th century, as far as I know, people became aware of one possibility, which can be stated more simply as follows. The scientific understanding of the world, and the understanding of the world which we find in modern science, is not simply the perfection of our natural understanding. It is a radical modification of it, based on certain specific premises. From this moment on, the analysis of our natural understanding of the world and the analysis of the scientific understanding of the world became two entirely different things. And it was then understood they must have to be distinguished, and the true problem for such a philosophy would have to be first to understand the natural understanding of the world, and then to see by virtue of what modification does the scientific understanding of the world arise from the natural. And this change is connected, I believe, most of all, with the name of Husserl, the founder of a school called Phenomenology in German, Husserl. That is, of course, one crucial difference, and that's most immediately most important difference between the state of the modern day and the Kant. Now, I would like to read a few more passages in the passage. Very, let us, no, I think we should read the conclusion of this passage here, because there are very famous formula occurs, which we must take home. We will continue when we left off. But as it is, since I do not need from morality anything except that freedom is not self-contradictory, and therefore can at least be sought, and I do not need to understand it anymore. You see, that is the problem we discussed before, the difference between thinking and knowing. I can think freedom. Freedom is not contradictory because there is no contradiction between freedom and the mechanism, by virtue of the distinction between appearance and being itself. But I do not understand it. How does it say in civilization?
But though I cannot know, I can yet think freedom. That is to say, the representation of it is at least not self-contradictory.
No, that is not the same language. But a little bit, but it must be a bit later than where you read.
Is it the last line in the paragraph?
No. That should be words. It is in this edition, page 33, the last word. Page 32 is the last word. Then you read it and you find it is a bit late.
But as I require only for morality, nothing more, except only that liberty should not contradict itself, and therefore still at least may be thought, without it being necessary to look farther into it. That
is not right, and without necessary to comprehend it.
That consequently it lays no obstacle at all in the way of the mechanism of nature, of the self-same action taken in other relationship. The doctrine of morality thus maintains its place, and physics is.
You see, that is a very simple and superficial formulation, but not misleading. Kant tries to preserve physics as a deterministic system, and he also tries to preserve morality. He cannot do it except by making the distinction between appearance and thing itself. Yes?
Which would not have occurred had not critiqued and instructed us previously respecting our unavoidable ignorance in respect of things in themselves, and limited everything to mere phenomena, which we can
limited everything which we can know theoretically to mere phenomena. Yeah?
Even this explanation of the positive utility of the critical principles of pure reason may be shown in respect of the conception of God and of the simple nature of our soul, which I, for the sake of brevity, pass over. I cannot, therefore, ever assume God, freedom, and immortality in favor of the necessary practical use of my reason, if I do not take away at the same time speculative reason, its pretension to transcendent insight, since in order to attain this, it must make use of those principles which, while they indeed extend merely to objects of experience, they nevertheless are applied to that which cannot be an object of experience, turn this really always into phenomena, and so declare all practical extension of pure reason impossible. I must therefore then abolish science dogmatism of metaphysics, that is, the preconception of making progress in it without the critique of pure reason, is the sure source of all unbelief opposed to morality, which at all times is very dogmatic.
Namely, the unbelief is always not the morality. So that is the German formula. I had to remove, how do you say, outward is not right. What had to do with knowledge in order to find place for faith or belief.
I must therefore abolish science.
Abolish is of course important. That is also not Aufheben, the German word which came later on in the great Jews, the 30s, it doesn't of course have in Kant that meaning, where Aufheben means both to destroy and to raise. That is not, but on the other hand, abolish and deny, I somehow do not, are not,
Suspend.
Yeah, that would be somehow fit better. I cannot now find a better translation. Now, what then does Kant say? If without the critique of pure reason, without the critique which he has given, we necessarily assume that scientific knowledge of the world is adequate or full knowledge. In this scientifically understood world, there is not only no knowledge for God, freedom and immortality of the soul, but not even the possibility for God. And Kant says that it's fatal to morality. And the argument is more precisely this: the immediate demand of morality is freedom. And Kant contends that if we cannot understand even that, we cannot assume that freedom without assuming at the same time God and immortality. In this question, I do not want to have this message now to enter. The dogmatism of science itself has its legitimate dogmatism, but legitimate only within certain limits. And these limits are established by Kant in this form. Science is the most adequate form of knowing the phenomenal world, but the phenomenal world is necessarily distinguished from and inferior in rank to the finite world, the world in which morality is at home. Here, I think we must now. There are extremely important passages here in the preface to the second edition, which we must skip. But I would like to mention a few more points. In the next paragraph, which is very important because Kant makes here a distinction between the interest of the schools, of academicians, the interest of man, and he tries to show what his criticism, that his denial of the possibility of theoretical metaphysics is a blow, of course, to the professors of metaphysics. But that is clear, but Kant says there is a higher interest, and that's the interest of man. And this interest is not damaged by the critique of pure reason, but rather helped. Now, in this connection, he uses a remarkable expression. Give me your expression kindly. We can't read that very important. Yeah, on page 35. This possession, thus, here. Now, wait a moment what that possession is now. Namely, the possession of these beliefs, let us say. Yeah? Belief in God, freedom and immortality.
This possession thus not only remains undisturbed, but it yet rather gains thereby in respect, because the schools now are taught not to assume to themselves any higher and more extended insight into a matter which regards man's general care than that to which the great, the most estimable for us, mass can equally attain.
That is a very important remark. the translation doesn't come out at the beginning of the great multitude, and mass is a term standing for physics. I believe it has been applied to human masses only since the French Revolution, if I'm correctly informed. Levé en masse. Yeah? What is that in English, levé en masse? Rising in mass. But today people speak of the masses and translate the expression the many or the multitude by the masses, which is of course absolutely absurd. But Kant doesn't speak of the masses. It's a great multitude, which for us is most Achtungswürdig. That is more than experience, which deserves our greatest human respect. That is the other side of the criticism of speculative metaphysics. If in the most important respect, the most simple mass is equal to the most sophisticated philosophy, in the most important respect, both can only believe. There is no supremacy superiority of knowledge, namely regarding God, freedom, and the soul. Then, of course, the status of the multitude of men is intimately related. That is this element of Rousseau of which I have spoken before, and which we must never forget when coming to the more interesting question. So we must, to my very great regret, I must leave it at this few remarks about regarding the preface to the second edition, because we cannot go into a really adequate study of Kant's criticism of metaphysics. I repeat, therefore, again the 2 points which Kant makes. The true basis of metaphysics, morality, and the Copernican revolution of which we have talked last time. Reason is projecting, constituting, not receptive or passive. And this gives rise to 2 questions. First, only in and through morality does man become aware of the supra-sensible. Only morality is not and cannot be in need of experience, but is purely rational. And we have seen, we have read in the section on the ideas where Kant refers to Plato, why that is so. Experience cannot possibly give us a clear notion of virtue, of goodness, because no man is likely to be simply good. And even if he were, we would not know that he is simply good if he did not have an independent standard of judgment. Experience is unable to supply this moral and political standard. Therefore, the moral and political teaching must be strictly a priori. The second question which arises on the basis of the 2 points I mentioned is there a connection between the supremacy of practical reason and the new view of theoretical reason? The new view according to which reason is not receptive, but projecting or constituting. Now, let us turn to one passage which is most important in this respect, and that is in the Transcendental Dialectic. Let me find in the section on the paralogisms of pure reason. If you give me your edition, I will find it at the end of the paralogism.
I don't think anyone else has this edition. Probably
yeah, on page 381 is this edition.
Thought taken by itself is a logical function. Therefore, the pure spontaneity of
let us stop here for one moment, and I will explain only part of it. In all knowledge, there is given a manifold of individuals, it is called, where it takes the variety of sense data. The color patch and the viewing. And some other data. And now this manifold has to be united to become intelligent. This is the action of the spontaneity of the combination or connection of the manifold. That is thinking itself. Now, beginning of the next paragraph.
The proposition, I think, insofar as it amounts to the assertion, I exist thinking, is no mere logical function, but determines the subject, which is then at the same time object in respect of existence.
Yeah, let us stop here. We don't need more than that. Now, what does... Oh no, I'm sorry. We need rather the last sentence of the preceding paragraph. I made a mistake. Yeah.
If, on the other hand, I would be conscious of myself simply as thinking, then, since I am not considering how my own self may be given an intuition, self makes mere appearance to me, the I that thinks, with no mere appearance, insofar as I think. In the consciousness of myself, in mere thought, I am the being itself, although nothing in myself is thereby given for thought.
Yeah. Now I will try to explain what this is about. You remember perhaps the old story of Descartes, who believed to have discovered an absolute certainty in I think, hence I am. And since I am as a thinking being, and merely as a thinking being, but since thinking, it can be the action only of an incorporeal being, I know that I am as an incorporeal being, as an incorporeal substance, and therefore that would seem to follow the immortality of myself as an incorporeal substance. I thought Descartes was prudent enough never to try to prove the latter point. But other people did not lack Descartes' caution, and therefore that was one of the famous proofs of the existence of the mortality of the soul. Now, to which Kant says, there is no question. The most fundamental phenomenon is the I think. The I think. But I do not, this, however, does not entitle me to say I know myself as a thinking and therefore incorporeal or immaterial substance. That is the meaning of this whole discussion. I'm now interested not in this aspect in Kant's criticism of the proof of the immortality of the soul. Let's turn to the paragraph after the next. But let's assume.
Should it be granted that we may in due course discover, not in experience, but in certain laws of the pure employment of reason, laws which are not merely logical rules, but which while holding a priori also concern our existence, grounds for regarding ourselves as legislating completely a priori in regard to our own existence, and as determining this existence, there would thereby be revealed a spontaneity through which our reality would be determinable, independently of the conditions of empirical intuition. And we should also become aware that in the
we don't need it for our present purpose. Now, what Kant, the only point which I asked you to keep in mind of the preceding sentences which are not intelligible, one doesn't think the whole section, is this. There is a point Thinking as such is covered as spontaneity. Spontaneity is opposed to receptivity. The colored patches, that's our receptivity. We just receive them. The combining of the colored touch and the sound and whatever else to the thing and its quality, that is an act of the spontaneity of reason. And this spontaneity of reason is the same fundamentally as the fact that our reason is projecting and constituting and not passive or static. Now Kant says here, refers to other phenomena, namely to the moral conscience, or to the moral. In the case of morality, Kant says, we are I must add something more. This spontaneity of reason is a reason why the human understanding prescribes nature's laws, as Kant expresses in another book. In other words, reason projects the possible object of experience. The actual object must be depend, of course, also on sensation. The possibility of universally valid laws of nature depends on such a primary project of reason. This applies to theoretics. Now, what is the case in practice? In practical reason, we are also legislating. We are legislating, however, in regard to our own being only, not in regard to dogs and cats. But we are legislating entirely a priori. There is no possibility of supplementing, no necessity of supplementing the dictates of our practical race by experience. The command, thou shalt not kill, the text is example, is perfectly clear without any experience. You do not need to say, well, let me make a distinction between some individuals whom I might and others whom I might not kill, and so this kind of experiential things does not enter at all. Now, what I'm telling you is this. The ego, the I, as legislating with a view to possible experience, cannot determine without experience. It can only give the general outline. The ego as legislating in regard to itself cannot possibly be based on experience because it is fully determinative in itself. This gives us the outline of an answer to the question I raised before, whether there is a connection between the supremacy of practical reason and the novel view of theoretical reason. We can state this now as follows. Kant asserts in the first place against Hume, but in fact against the whole tradition, the spontaneity of reason. Now, spontaneity is a term with a long prehistory, and the classic type occurs in Aristotle's Ethics, Book 3, where Aristotle makes a distinction between spontaneity, which also all animals possess, and choice, which only man possesses. This distinction was somehow, I believe, in Kant's mind when he spoke of the spontaneity of reason. The spontaneity of reason is some lower than choice or freedom. The spontaneity of the understanding gives rise to the phenomenal world as a determinate world. It is a kind of freedom. Our theoretical knowledge is based on a kind, or if you want to, on a shadow of freedom. The true freedom is the freedom of morality. But there is a connection between the assertion of the supremacy of practical reason, which implies the supremacy of freedom, and the new understanding of reason, of theoretical reason. Theoretical reason is itself an exercise of freedom. It is spontaneity. Now, I would like to make a journey, not merely due to the degree of translation. But there are certain very broad things which we must understand, even if we have no interest beyond that in Kant or in philosophy at all. We must try to understand. I have begun partly before, but I will manage to bring the thing somewhat closer to your understanding. Let us assume that we have understood that on certain premises, it was necessary for Kant to distinguish between the phenomena and the thing itself. And the simple basis for this step was the, I believe, the assumed necessity of a strict and deterministic system, and the impossibility of understanding morality on a deterministic plane. That must always be taken as the starting point, as Kant said. So, if the world of modern physics, or say the physics of Kant's time, is the world simply, there could not possibly be morality. That's Kant's point. Therefore, Kant is trying to show that the world as known theoretically is only the world as it appears, as distinguished from the world as it is itself. But there is a great difficulty here. The thing itself is unknowable, Kant says. But even this, how can it be said to be, to exist, if it is unknowable? That is the simple difficulty which is in your sight. One can say to the development of after Kant, and it started from this difficulty as well as from some others. Now, we go back to a question which was raised by Mr. Hawking some meetings ago. What about the thing which Kant is doing in his critique of pure reason? He discovers here a structure of reason itself. This innermost structure of reason is not mere phenomenon, nor is it in Kant's thing itself. The status of that is that's pure. Would it not make sense to say this innermost structure of reason, or to use a somewhat more exact expression, the transcendental subjectivity, the fundamental acts by which reason constitutes the experientiable universe, that this is the thing in itself. Let us drop God and immortality, to put it very bluntly, which Kant postulated, and let us see in this transcendental subjectivity the thing itself, and therefore, in a way, God. Of course, that requires other radical changes, and as a result of this change, we can say we have the Hegelian system. For Hegel, the thing in itself is knowable, known, perfect. The adequate understanding of human reason is the absolute knowledge, is the final metaphysics. It is a metaphysics which has nothing to do anymore with incorporeal substance. It is based, according to its claim, on every point on phenomena accessible to our experience. But it lays bare the inner connection of all elements of our experience, and that is the thing in itself. Now I will try to state this a bit more precisely. In Kant there are two kinds of postulates of practical reason. Immortality of the soul. I disregard now the problem of God. Two kinds of postulates of practical reason. First was immortality of the soul. But there was also, as we shall see next time, a kind of postulate of infinite progress towards the perfect political order, also a moral postulate. Why did Kant, that has something to do with the question of Kant's philosophy of history. Why did Kant make these two kinds of postulates, immortality of the soul and infinite progress towards the perfect political order? Because he made a distinction between the moral progress and institutional progress. The progress towards the perfect political order is not necessary, is not in itself a moral progress. It is a morally desirable progress, but not a moral progress. Man can live in a perfectly just society, according to Kant, and can have the morality of devils. That is, so the perfect political order can be is morally desirable, but not in itself moral. It would be moral if all its members were moral, but that of course it depends entirely on the free act of these individuals. Therefore, Kant is really compelled to make such a distinction which finds its expression in moral progress demands immortality of the soul, but I still have the possibility of changing, and that is not cut off brutally by death. But on the other hand, this institutional progress is also morally demanded, but that is not the same as the moral progress. In other words, the institutional progress that Kant sees as morally desirable, but not fulfilling the demand of morality, is strictly speaking lifeless. I mean, lacking moral life. Necessities of all kinds will, of a prudential nature, if you say, will bring about, may bring about, a perfectly just result. But there is no morality required for that. In itself, it is a lifeless process. Now this we can say was in a way the starting point of Hegel. Hegel tried to prove that this progress towards the perfect social order is necessarily a moral progress too. Hence, Hegel had no use anymore for the immortality of the soul. It was strong. But there is also, while this has many advantages and recommendations in the eyes of most modern people, it has one great disadvantage. Namely, if there is a fundamental harmony, it means there is a danger in assuming a fundamental harmony between institutional perfection and moral perfection. The simple word for that danger is feeling, self-satisfaction, that one lives in a particular society and acts according to its laws and orders and manners, that can go together with being wise and simple. At any rate, this point, this difficulty in the Hegelian solution, and quite a few others, led to a revolt against Hegel after his big time, and led to a return to Kant. And the most effective form of this return to Kant today is existentialism. And I would like to explain this briefly. To return to Kant meant to assert that, to reassert in one way or the other, the distinction between the phenomenon and the thing itself. But it was impossible to say the thing in itself is unknowable, because it's really not a tenable position. Therefore, existentialism asserts that the thing itself is knowable in a sense. There is an awareness of it. But this awareness includes the realization that the thing itself is essentially elusive and cannot possibly be fully understood or intellectually controlled. This thing in itself is what is called existence. That this is so is shown by the statement of the greatest man who has been connected with existentialism, Heidegger. Hegel has said, the simple formula of Hegel for his thought is that substance is the subject. I cannot explain the subject, but the substance that the subject is constituted. The substance is not matter, but substance is the subject. Heidegger, the substance is existence. From this point of view, it would be very interesting to have a look at Heidegger's interpretation of Kant, but I believe that would be extremely not far. And instead, because it would go much beyond what we can do now here. It is wiser to find now a link up to the subject of our next meeting, namely Kant's writing on philosophy of history, philosophy of history. And here, that will be more easily intelligible to all of us. The problem is that Kant admitted the possibility and the necessity of the philosophy of history. But this philosophy of history does not form a part of existence. It is somehow marginal. The question is, what prevented Kant from making a philosophy of history an essential part of his doctrine? And also, what compelled him to admit its possibility? And the reason for this question addressed to Kant is our desire to understand somewhat better what is meant by this mysterious thing called history. Because that makes the investigation of Kant makes also matter. Now, one point to which I referred in my very brief summary is this. There was one great competitor to the philosophy of history, or to the recognition of history as a central problem of philosophy. And that was the immortality of the soul. That is, I think, in one way easy to understand. If men are chiefly and predominantly concerned with a salvation or perfection in a life after death, their concern with perfection on earth is likely to be smaller. Perhaps I'm wrong in that premise, but it seems there seems to be some truth to it, that the concern with improvement of earthly institutions has become greater in proportion as the belief in immortality has lost its former power over large bodies of men. But that, of course, would in itself be a merely sociological or historical fact of no serious interest. The interest is this. The interesting question is this. Whatever we may think about the mortality of the soul, is this belief not embody an awareness of difficulty regarding progress, difficulties which became less used to be how the soul itself in the 19th century. That, I believe, is one subject which we have to consider, that is talking the other. And it is also something to do with the issue which I mentioned before in connection with Hegel. What about this essential cleavage between institutions and morality, or between institutions and theories? Is this not an eternal problem which would even arise if all institutions were the best institutions? Was Kant not aware of this difficulty to a higher degree than Hegel and Hegel's half-pupil Marx? This much about the question which we should keep in mind for next time. And I promise those who have been shocked by the things we read today that next time there will be easier, and for quite some time there will be easier going. But if there is one, no, it's too late, but no, unless someone has a very urgent and clear and simple question which is possible to answer while I wrote my book.